Greetings and welcome to the Transform Podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Anastasio. This is episode 56, and it is Wednesday, May 4th, 2022. Welcome back to the podcast, guys. Just want to dive right into our episode today, and I want to use today's episode to do something that, you know, if you follow us long enough, you're going to realize we do periodically here, which is repeat ourselves, okay, and kind of hammer home the same message in more than one way. And, you know, I learned this from my mentor, Gary Vee, who has, 5 or 6 or 7 core messages, and he's, made 600 plus Daily V episodes out of those 5 or 6 or 7 messages, and why can't we do the same? So, getting all that out of the way, in all seriousness, guys, I did want to use this episode today to implore you to get moving in the direction of producing more content for your business, for your brand, for whatever it is that you are trying to accomplish from a business perspective that requires you to be out there and to be visible. Okay, now I should have had this ready to go before and I didn't, so I'm looking it up right now, but I wanted to cite to you guys episode, where was it? Let's see. Episode 39. So published episode 39 on February 25th. And it was titled, "You're Not Producing Enough Content," and it just so happened to be, I believe, the longest episode that I recorded. Never mind, that goes to episode 31, Know, Like, and Trust, part 1 was 46 minutes. But I believe in second place is the episode I'm referring to, episode 39, "You're Not Producing Enough Content," quote unquote. It was a little over 44 minutes. And basically, guys, you say, okay, Chris, so you already did an episode on producing more content. What are you doing another one for? And so to answer that question very briefly, it's inspiration that I received from episode 421, I believe it was, of Daily V. And I, just personally to share with you guys, is if you follow the podcast, I'm a fanatic of Gary Vaynerchuk and everything he teaches. And I've just been personally working my way through the 600 Daily V vlogs that he produced and published between late 2015 and I believe the very, very beginning of 2020, which is when he had stopped doing them and turned them into a weekly vlog that only ran for a couple months and was cut short by the pandemic starting in March 2020. So I believe I have the history correct there. But anyway, episode 421, which sees Gary in about early 2018 timeframe, he talks in that episode about, a variety of topics, and at one point, it's actually kind of funny. It shows Gary in an airport. He's kind of crouching, talking to somebody on the phone in the airport. You can only see his part of the conversation. You can't see, or you can't hear what the other person's saying. But at one point in that conversation, the snippet that they published, he says, more content, more content, more content, more content. The answer to every question is more content. And then there's a pause. He's listening to the person on the phone, and after the pause, you hear him say, more content. So basically, he says this, 4 or 5 times over, and presumably the person on the other end of the phone asks him a question, and true to his word, he answers with, quote unquote, more content. So, so that kind of caught my attention because it's a theme that I pound home on this podcast as much as possible, and like I said, I featured it in a couple of episodes here, particularly episode 39. And so, here's the thing, guys. When I heard that, when I saw that clip, of course, it kind of tickled me a little bit. I mean, I kind of laughed out loud when I watched it, just because they presented it kind of artfully. But it made me think about another analogy that Gary uses that I thought might be helpful to you guys, particularly if you follow American baseball, or perhaps if this is applicable in other sports that you guys might be into or you might follow. You can carry this analogy over. But I don't think I ever mentioned this before. So I was like, well, let me work this into episode 56. Let me talk about this a little bit in this framework of producing more content. And that is the concept of at-bats. Okay, so at-bats in Major League Baseball, United States Major League Baseball, It's the number of times you come to the plate. And in a standard 162 game baseball season, you're going to come to the plate, if you're a decent hitter, like if you're in the lineup just about every day, you're going to get about 500 at-bats, right? I mean, give or take. Maybe, if you walk a lot where you don't get an official at-bat, maybe it's closer to 400. Or if you're extremely prolific with a high batting average and you're always getting on base and you're always hitting the ball, you might be closer to 600. Okay, but let's just call it 500, right? So across a baseball season, a standard 162 game baseball season, players, who are batting just about every day will get 500 tries at the plate to prove their performance, to prove out how good of a hitter they are. I mean, that's not necessarily their objective, or it shouldn't be. It should be winning the game. But the point is that by the time the season's over with, whatever metric they've produced in terms of batting average, how many hits, how many times do they hit the ball and get on base, divided by that 500 or so, give or take, at bats, that batting average is going to tell you how good of a hitter they are, right? And so if you follow the sport, you know that a batting average doesn't mean anything if a player doesn't get up to the plate very often. So if a player has 50 at-bats and has a 500 batting average, it doesn't mean anything, even though 500 is technically an amazing batting average. A player who's been to the plate 500 times with a 300 batting average is more impressive than one that's been to the plate 50 times with a 500 batting average. You see what I'm saying? So that person's performance is kind of proven out over time, over this period of time. And therefore the number means something. And so bringing it back to digital marketing and using social media to get the word out, when you look at Gary's message on getting more at-bats, what he's kind of saying there is, number one, you literally need to get up to the plate a lot to produce the amount of content required, not only to hit the volume you need, but to figure out what works and what doesn't. If you don't get up to the plate enough, you don't really have a good sense of what's working and what's not working, what's viable and what's not viable. Still images versus videos, textual versus audio, audio versus video, pictures versus animation. Whatever you're testing, whatever you're putting out there, you can't really tell whether it's any good, whether it's working, unless you have enough at-bats to make those metrics mean something. And so it's the same thing with baseball. If you don't get up to the plate often enough, that batting average is meaningless. Okay? So I kind of see Gary's comments about at-bats in two different contexts. The first context is the pure volume context, right? You just need to get to the plate a lot to produce enough, right? To just pure and simple produce enough content. If you don't go to the plate, if you don't make the attempt, you don't get the content. But it also means that from a testing perspective, from an experimentation perspective, if you don't have enough at-bats, then you don't know whether what you're doing is working or not. Plain and simple. Okay? If you post, once a week, 4 times a month, 100 times a year, or 200 times a year, it's not enough. It means nothing. Like, I posted these 200 times and 100 of them were still images and I got the most likes from those still images. Doesn't mean anything to me. It wouldn't inform me of the proper strategy based on those kind of metrics. Okay, you need to be producing many times a day, times days in the week, times weeks in the month, times months in the year, to then come out with numbers that matter. Like, Chris, I posted 1,500 times this year, and my still images perform the best. Then I would say, go with still images. Do many more still images than anything else. You've actually learned something from that approach. Okay, so again, it's just one of those things. Like I was inspired by this clip. It was kind of funny in one way. It made me think about it in another way, and it just kind of triggered me a little bit. Like, I really haven't talked about the at-bat concept that Gary talks about. So I wanted to get that out to you guys today. I wanted to encourage you to keep thinking in terms of how do I produce more. It doesn't necessarily mean how do I add more hours to the day to produce content. I mean, if you have to do that, if you have to take more time to do it, well, you may have to do that. But there's also ways to take one piece of content that you have and make many out of it. And I'll finish with this example of that. There's so many examples of that. I'm just going to finish with this one. Let's say you have a tendency to write better than do audio or video. You're like, hey, Chris, I got to do textual because I'm sitting at my laptop during the day and I don't have time to, put a microphone on or set up a video camera. I got to type it. It's like, okay, no problem. So let's say you go on your Facebook business page and you type a 3-paragraph post. Okay, so say it's, 10 sentences or so spread out over 3 paragraphs and you have a Facebook post. Okay, that's one piece. Take that piece, put it on your LinkedIn page. If you're running a business, you probably have a LinkedIn page. Okay, boom, now you have 2 pieces of content. Take that paragraph, break it into 10 sentences, go on Twitter, check out episode 49, Hanging by a Thread, episode 49 of this podcast, Hanging by a Thread. Learn how to do threads on Twitter. Take the 10 sentences, put 1 sentence per tweet. Now you have 10 tweets, right? So you have a Facebook post, a LinkedIn post, 10 tweets. That's 12 pieces of content. Take the 10 sentences, go into your IG page, your stories, post 1 sentence per story. So now you have 10 stories. Okay? So you have a Facebook post, a LinkedIn post, 10 tweets, and 10 Instagram stories. That's 22 pieces of content from the 8 minutes that you typed that post on LinkedIn, and the other 4 minutes to proliferate it across the other platforms. Do you understand what I'm saying? So you didn't, let's say the Facebook post alone took you 8 minutes, but to get the other 21 pieces of content up took you another 4 minutes. I don't think the difference between 8 and 12 minutes for the requisite multiplication of your reach across now 4 different platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, I don't think that's going to kill you. I don't think that's going to cause you a problem during your work day to pull that off. Okay? So you see what I'm saying? Yes, you can produce more content without putting a whole lot of extra time into it. It's just about thinking differently, seeing the content from all angles, and realizing what you have in that piece of content. Oh, I've got 3 paragraphs text. Okay, well now I've got 10 sentences. Okay, well now I've got 10 Instagram stories. You see what I'm saying? So your mind will start to get trained how to see a piece of content and break it into a bunch of pieces, almost as you're developing it, right? Or as you finish developing it, and then you can take a step back from it and be like, okay, that's what I created there, that's what I can do with it, that's where I can put it. Okay, so again, in that particular day, that example I just said, you can have 1 at-bat, the Facebook post, or 22 at-bats. Right? What's 1 times 365? 365 at-bats throughout the year. What's 22 times 365? I'm going to give you the exact number. 8,030. 8,030 divided by 365. 2,200% difference in the number of at-bats by doing what I just described versus 1 single Facebook post and moving along. Okay, guys, so let's wrap it up here, guys. Didn't want this episode to go too long. Think about it. Producing more content, more content, more content, more content, in the words of Gary Vee. And by the way, think of it in terms of at-bats. Think of it in terms of proving out what's working and what's not working. If you don't get the at-bats, you're not going to know what's working. All right, guys. So I didn't mention this at the beginning. Just a quick note last week, episode 54 and 55. 54, just some musings, some philosophical musings on Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter. Check that out. It's about a 23-minute episode. Episode 55, Ask Yourself a Question. That was kind of an episode about how to do a Q&A in like a pitch and catch with yourself to create content on some of the video platforms like TikTok and IG Reels and stuff like that. So you check that out. It's just under 19 minutes or just over 18 minutes. So those are our 2 episodes last week. Just want to put a plug in for those. Today, episode 56, we covered more content, and then we will be back by the weekend at the latest with episode 57. Really appreciate you guys listening. Check us out on Facebook and LinkedIn at Transform, transform.com on the website. Subscribe to the podcast, link it, share it, subscribe to it. We really appreciate it. It means a lot to us. Super appreciate your support of the Transform podcast. So thanks again, guys. Hope everybody has a great Wednesday night, and we'll be back again later this week with episode 57. Have a great night, guys. Bye-bye.